Tackling endgame bosses and raids is a long-term goal for most OSRS players, and plenty of people stuck in the mid-game just aren't sure where to start. What if I told you that you can learn all the skills needed, make enough bank for sick gear, and have a great time doing it just by mastering literally 4 pieces of content? You might think this is clickbait. How can learning a few bosses prepare anyone for the dozens and dozens of bosses in this game? Here's the answer. The only things you really need to learn about are the basic movement mechanics, prayer switching and gear switching. The bosses I cover today will teach you all of that and more. After that, all you need is a bit of practice to get that click accuracy up and a bit of knowledge on the boss mechanics that you'll have to deal with. This video is aimed firmly at the mid-game player, but if you're an early game player, stick around because you'll get a great idea of what you're in for soon. And if you're deep in the end game already, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. We'll be skipping past the true beginner content like Amoxliartle and Scurious because we've already talked about that a lot on this channel, but I'll give a huge shout out to these 2 bosses in particular for introducing so many players to PvM. All the bosses I do include in this list will make you bank as well as teach you how to play the game. Let's start with the single best boss for teaching you a lot about OSRS movement mechanics. I'm talking about the Moons of Peril. If you aren't familiar with the Moons, it's in Valamor and requires the Children of the Sun and Perilous Moons quests. I've already said this is aimed at mid-game players, so with melee stats in the 70s, you should have no trouble. Unlike most bosses, you'll actually want to prioritize defensive stats over pure strength bonus here. This is due to the boss's special attacks. Tank gear from barrows like Torags or Dirox goes a long way here. This boss is actually a trio of enemies. You can kill all 3 for increased chances in the loot chest at the end, or prioritize one if you're after a certain weapon or armor piece. This means if you're just focusing on making money, you'll likely be grinding the Blood Moon, as the drops that she adds to the loot pool are the most valuable of the 3 bosses. Moons are great for beginners for a few reasons, but the biggest one is that it earns you a reasonable amount of money and has literally 0 supply costs. You can gather all of the food and potions you need from around the boss area itself. I have got a full guide out for this boss, but we'll go over some of the most important mechanics quickly so you have the context of why this boss is so useful for preparing you for the end game. The great thing about all the mechanics is that they're quite forgiving. You might take damage, but you're not getting one shot if you mess anything up. The Blood Moon and the Blue Moon will teach you about stepping back and stepping out to avoid attacks. The Blood Moon during the Jaguar phase and the Blue Moon during the Frozen Weapon special attack. This is a pretty famous mechanic used by one of Old School's toughest bosses, Verzic in the Theatre of Blood, but it's also used by other bosses. My personal favourite, Duke Succulus, springs to mind. They're both going to teach you a lot about movement mechanics too. Arguably the most important mechanic in the entire game is avoiding the shit on the floor. Blood Moon will teach you to avoid stationary shit that randomly spawns during the Blood phase, and the Blue Moon will teach you about shit that is already moving during tornadoes. They're pretty simple mechanics, but practicing these will have you mastering movement in no time at all. The Eclipse Moon is the only place that really teaches you about staying behind moving targets. This isn't used at many places, but it is essential at the big boy Zuck in the Inferno. Don't discount the fact that all 3 mini-bosses are going to teach you about movement, as you have to move around in between the glowing circles on the floor. Getting a feel for the pathing your character takes when you're moving is going to help more than you realise in the long run. To summarise, Moons will teach you a lot about movement and make you some fairly consistent money with some chances at some big drops. It's also not going to drain your supplies as long as you don't die and have to pay death costs. It's definitely worth starting your PvM journey here. Moving on to a boss that's arguably the single most consistent moneymaker in the entire game, Vorkath. He's locked behind Dragon Slayer 2. It's a little less forgiving than Moons, as it's got some attacks that will certainly wipe you out if you don't know what you're doing. However, once you get the hang of the mechanics, you will probably never die here, and every single kill is going to make 50k at a bare minimum. More realistically, you'll be getting 150k per kill. With the gravestone fees here being fairly affordable, you'll be making your money back in no time, regardless of how many times you die in your attempts to learn this content. We are not just here for the money though. Vorkath is a great introduction to mechanics we'll see elsewhere in the game. For starters, you can't protect against all damage at Vorkath, so you'll need to get on top of your resource management skills, making sure you don't run out of prayer, food, and also that you're protected from extra mechanics like venom and anti-fire. You'll also have to deal with a few mechanics that are pretty much copy-pasted into other bosses. The targeted falling fireball is used elsewhere, most notably in Kefri during Tombs of Amascut. The Wook's Walk isn't specifically used elsewhere, but it does teach you a lot about how to move and attack without losing time and ending up standing still. The purple fireball that turns off your prayers is great preparation for fights like the Gauntlet against Hunleff and during the Vardorvis with the head attack. Both of these encounters have mechanics that can disable your prayer, so practicing those reaction times to get it switched back on ASAP is essential. Whilst not being a one-to-one crossover, switching gear to kill the zombie scorpion ad is pretty useful. The general concept of switching to a different style to deal with an extra enemy is included in many bosses, the most obvious one coming to mind being the crabs and the blood at Maiden during the Theatre of Blood. The whole acid phase just really hammers home the broad concept of not standing in the shit on the floor too. If you found this useful so far, drop the video a like and subscribe if you want to see more from me. Any engagement really does help me out. Moving on from Vorkath, we've got another bit of content that takes absolutely zero supplies to get involved with. Even better, you don't need any armor or weapons. We're talking about the Gauntlet, and once you get good, his big brother, the Corrupted Gauntlet. Both of these encounters require the Song of the Elves. Both the Gauntlet and CG give you pretty steady rewards and gives you the chance of the absolutely humongous enhanced weapon seed. The regular armor seeds aren't too bad either. The reason this place really shines though is that there's absolutely zero risk with the potential for those high rewards. You don't lose anything if you die, you don't need any weapons or armor, and you don't take in any supplies. The Gauntlet does have a prep phase as well as a boss fight. Whilst the prep phase can be a bit frustrating if you aren't getting the RNG in your favour, it can teach you quite a lot about moving and using your items effectively to avoid wasting ticks. This might not seem like it has a lot of crossover to any other content, but eating food and potions at the right time can massively increase your efficiency in any PvM encounter. The Hunleff fight, however, is in my opinion the single best crash course in prayer management, gear switching and movement in the entire game. You have to deal with switching your protection prayers at regular intervals, you have to deal with switching your offensive weapon after a certain amount of attacks, you have to deal with switching your prayer back on after it gets disabled, you've got to cope with avoiding stationary shit on the floor with the tiles that change colour, and also avoiding the moving shit on the floor with the tornadoes. That's pretty much every major mechanic rolled into one fight, and you'll need to deal with all of them. Although this is super tough, the regular Gauntlet makes all of this a lot more forgiving and is a great learner step towards the corrupted version, as well as a reasonable money-making method in its own right. The only downside really is that the prep can take a while, and Song of the Elves is likely going to be one of the final quests that you do. The final thing on this list is the only raid that's truly appropriate for mid-game players to use to develop their PvM skills and make a little bit of money doing it, the Tombs of Amascut. TOA is a pretty unique piece of content. Its invocation system allows you to gradually make everything harder. You can start with the absolute bare minimum and add in extra mechanics one at a time as you learn them. The other unique part about TOA is that you can choose which boss you'd like to tackle first. Unlike Tob or Chambers, this means you don't have to painfully grind through content that you're already comfortable with in order to start learning something new. For example, if you've done Krondis and decide you want to learn Kefri, you can jump straight into Kefri with all of your supplies next time you enter the raid. Here's the other great thing about TOA. As long as you don't turn on one of the death-related invocations, you get unlimited retries at every boss. You even get rewarded with some honeyed locust if you die. This is like a mega food potion combination item that's also stackable. So if you're desperate to learn one of the fights and don't want to waste any supplies at all, just go in, pick a boss, die loads, stack up the honeyed locust, and you've got unlimited healing there for all of your attempts. So if that hasn't sold you on Tombs of Amascut, I don't know what will. There are way too many mechanics to go over, but they're not going to prepare you for anything other than more TOA. The beauty of TOA is that it starts off as some mid to late game content and eventually ends up as super difficult end game raiding. It's really as sweaty as you want to make it. If you want to learn more about TOA, I've got a pretty thorough guide that a lot of people seem to like, so check that out. I'm also working on a new one since there were some changes recently. If you can master these 4 pieces of content, you'll have a solid base of all the skills you need to tackle any boss in the game, and you'll have made yourself a reasonable cash stack in the process to fund all of the gear and supplies that you need. There's loads of content to help prepare you for this stage if you're not quite there yet, so check out my other videos on that. If you've made it this far, you definitely owe me that like, and sub to the channel if you want to hear more from me. Big shout out to all of my channel members and Twitch subscribers. You're all legends, every single one of you. I massively appreciate it. Thanks for sticking around. I'll see you next time.